Good afternoon, Professor.
Good afternoon. How is everyone doing?
Great, now that you put the exam scores up.
Dude, I'm really happy with my exam score. I'm doing great.
Okay, that's good. Well, you know, at least, I mean, it's, as I said before, I mean, it would be, well, what's the word that I want to use here? In other words, I would be extremely unhappy if you guys didn't do very well because, you know, the questions are given to you beforehand. So all what you need to do is simply do your homework and put the answers together. And, you know, the questions are pretty straightforward. I mean, there's nothing hard about the questions. So I would be very disappointed. I guess this is the word I want to use here. You know, if you guys failed this course, because you shouldn't be failing this course. I mean, you know, the least you should be getting is a B in this course, B or an A. Even a C. If you get a C, that means you're really not working hard enough. So, you know, you can see from the test scores, they were pretty good. I mean, you know, they were all in the 80s, 90s. So that was pretty good. Okay.
Professor?
Yes.
I didn't get a test score.
Well, actually, there are about 12 or 13 students left. I didn't have the time, but hopefully.
Okay, I thought everyone got this out, so I got a little worried. Okay, thank you.
No, there are about probably 13 students now that I need to grade their tests. So give me a few days, and all of you should have the scores by then. It's been a hectic week for me. A lot of midterm exams, a lot of grading, a lot of posting. It's just, it takes a lot of time. It's much harder than the in-class meetings. This online business, it's very, it's not hard, but it's time consuming. It takes a lot of time, you know, to be putting things online, posting and going over the answers online. So, you know, you pretty much have to post everything, basically. Lecture notes. Yeah, so, yeah, just be a little bit patient and hopefully, you know, we will get all the scores in by the end of this week for sure. Probably you should get it maybe in a couple of days. So what was I gonna do here? Yeah, let me just, yeah, I guess someone did not remind me to record it. Unfortunately, we were not recording it. I had to pause it because I really need to put something on. That's why I had to pause it. Anyway, well, we caught it nevertheless. So basically, again, to reiterate, the Human Development Index, if it is less than 0.55, is considered to be very low. If it is between 0.55 and 0.7, it's considered to be medium. If it is above 0.7 but below 0.8, it's considered to be high. And if it is above 0.8, then obviously it's considered to be very high. And by now, I guess we already talked about low-income countries, medium-income countries, high-income countries. Also, we looked at Arab countries' human development indexes. So at least we have an idea of where each country stands in as far as the Human Development Index. And we have also looked at how the Human Development Index is being computed. And again, I'm going to repeat this simply because the previous ones were not basically recorded. We said that the UN uses a formula for determining Human Development Index by simply taking the actual value minus the minimum value over the maximum value minus the minimum value. And the UN uses minimum and maximum values for health, for education, and for income. So for health, the minimum value is 20, and the maximum value is 85 years of age. 20 years is the minimum, 85 years of age, that's the max. That's for the LEB, life expectancy at birth. So we got that, minimum value and maximum value for the health. And then for the education, we said that for the mean years of schooling, the minimum is 0, the maximum is 15. And for the expected years of schooling, the minimum is 0, the maximum is 18. And then for the per capita income, the minimum value is $100 per person per year. The maximum value is $75,000 per person per year. And like I said earlier on, when it comes to the per capita income index, it's always computed using natural logs. Very, very important, natural logs. And the reason, again, is simply because of the huge numbers involved here when we're talking about per capita income, unlike the other ones where the numbers were pretty much close to one another, very small and close. When it comes to per capita income, pretty much spread, widespread. And as a result, we really need to use natural logs for that. So that's basically it. And I guess then, of course, to determine what the Human Development Index is, we use the new Human Development Index concept, which is very different from the traditional old Human Development Index that was used many, many years ago. The new Human Development Index will use all the 3 indexes that we looked at and raise them to the power 1/3. This is known as the new Human Development Index. Now, the traditional, the old one, does not raise the different indexes to a power of 1/3. In fact, what it does is it multiplies each index by 1/3. So we will have 1/3 times, let's say, 0.7 plus 1/3 times 0.68 plus 1/3 times 0.7, whatever the indexes are. So you're simply multiplying them and adding them. You see the difference here? Anyone is not clear about the difference between the new human development and the traditional? It's simply in computing them, basically. So the new Human Development Index simply raises all the indexes to the power 3 and multiply them by one another. Whereas the traditional Human Development Index sums them up. Basically, it multiplies them by the weights and then sums them up. So let's say 1/3 times 0.65 plus 1/3 times 0.7 plus 1/3 times 0.5, let's say. That's the main difference. And that makes a huge difference in the sense that with the new Human Development Index, what happens if one country does not do very well in one component? It's going to affect the Human Development Index tremendously. Let's say, for example, there was a 0 in the educational index. So if that's a 0, then what would happen to the Human Development Index itself? Would be equal to what? Under the new Human Development Index, it will be equal to 0. Because remember, all of these indexes are multiplied by one another. Whereas in the traditional, they are added. So if one is 0, that's really not going to mean that you're going to come up with a Human Development Index that will be equal to 0. So you see the difference between the new human development, it puts more restrictions. The new Human Development Index puts more pressure, more restriction. It's highly restricted. Whereas the traditional, there isn't really much restrictions on it. So that's basically, I guess we gave it all that we need to give it. I don't think that we really need to go beyond that, but at least, I thought that you will have now an excellent idea of how you go about determining or computing or calculating a Human Development Index. At least you know how it is done. So you know the background of it. And that's important, by the way. It's okay. So now, having said that, let's talk a little bit about the Lorenz curve and see how the distribution of income, or at least have an idea how income is being distributed in these oil-rich countries. Not only in the oil-rich countries, but also in the resource-poor, labor-abundant countries. Because that will really give us an excellent idea or a good picture of where things are going in as far as the development trajectories are concerned. So income inequality really puts a huge restraint on economic development, as we will see. So again, here, of course, we're going to be using the Lorenz curve, basically, as you can see there, as a way of showing the distribution of income or wealth within an economy. So we pretty much are going to be using the Lorenz curve. And the Lorenz curve was developed by Max Lorenz in 1905 for pretty much representing the distribution of wealth within countries. Now, the Lorenz curve is very, very simple. It shows basically the cumulative share of income from different sections of the population. Now, if the income distribution happens to be perfect, meaning that 10% of the population would get 10% of income, 50% of population will get 50% of the income, 90% of the population will get 90% of the income, then obviously here we have pretty much perfect distribution of income. Income is equally distributed among the population, and this is basically something that countries would like to see happen. Unfortunately, in the real world, that would never happen. In other words, everyone will pretty much get the same salary. The poorest 20% of the population would get 20%, and the poorest 60% of the population would get 60%, and so on. So this is basically, can everyone see the graph here?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Lorenz curve. I'm sure a lot of you who have taken principles of micro would probably have gone over the Lorenz curve and the Gini coefficient. And basically, what you have is on the x-axis, you have the percentage households by income distribution. So it's pretty much divided into deciles. In other words, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100% of the population. And then on the vertical axis, you have the cumulative share of income, again, measured in percentages or in deciles, if you will. Here in this case, of course, what the author is doing is showing you. And then, of course, sometimes, I like to refer to the 45-degree line or as the line of equality. It's the imaginary line of equality. In reality, you will never have that line. Basically, it will not exist. So that's why, I usually like to refer to it as the imaginary line of equality. That's the 45-degree line. So any point on that line refers to perfect equality. So 50% of the population will get 50% of the income. 50% will get 50%. 60% of the population will get 60% of the income. 70% will get 70. 90 will get 90%. 100 will get, of course, 100%. So that's basically what the line, the 45-degree line, would represent, perfect equality. And here, of course, on this graph, you can see that if you are on this Lorenz curve, this is the Lorenz curve, which is obviously bulged outward. It's convex to the origin. That's how it bulges. And if we take any point on the Lorenz curve, let's say this will represent 20% of the population. And here, this Lorenz curve is telling you that 20% of the population is only getting 5% of the income. And if we take another point, this point right here on the Lorenz curve, this will reflect or will represent 90% of the population as owning only 55% of the wealth. So now the remaining 10% from 90 to 100 will obviously own how much of the wealth? 10% of the population will own, come on, it's easy. How much will the remaining 10% of the, if 90% of the population happen to own 55%, then the remaining 10% of the population must own 45% of income. Right? Is this clear enough? Very simple. I don't think it really requires any explanation. I mean, everything is pretty much straightforward and well depicted here by the simple graph. So obviously we call this the Lorenz curve. This is what the Lorenz curve is basically. And it simply tells us how income is being distributed among the population. So if we take this point right here, as we have seen, the Lorenz curve tells us that 90% of the population happens to be getting 55% of income, and the top 10% happens to be getting 45% of income. So that's basically it. Now this area right here is referred to as area A. So the area between the Lorenz curve and the line of equality is represented by A. We call this the area A. Area B is the area below the Lorenz curve. In other words, it's bounded between the x-axis and the y-axis and the Lorenz curve. So this is area B. So all of this right here is your area B, and all of this is your area A. So if I want to get close to perfect distribution of income, I want to really move the Lorenz curve upward as close as to the line of equality. So the further up I go, the closer I am to the line of equality, the 45-degree line, the better my income is being distributed among my population. In other words, the more equally distributed the income would be. So I really want to get this A as small as possible. And I want to get this P as large as possible. So I want to move this thing up, increase my B, lessen my A. So in fact, the Gini coefficient or the Gini index is simply defined as A over A plus B. That's your Gini index. That's your Gini coefficient. A divided by A plus B. Now, what happens if A is 0?
You have perfect equality.
What's that?
You have perfect equality,
Very
where 10% receives 10%, or 10% of the population receives 10% of the income, 50 to 50, 90 to 90, 100 to 100.
Correct. So if A happens to be 0, that means this whole area disappears basically, and the Lorenz curve pretty much becomes the line of equality, basically. That's what we mean when we say A is equal to 0. That's not going to happen in reality, of course, but if it does, then obviously the Lorenz curve will coincide perfectly with the line of equality. So in other words, the Lorenz curve will bulge inwards all the way until it becomes leveled with the line of equality. Now, what happens if B is equal to 0, to the Gini coefficient? What will the Gini coefficient equal if B happens to be 0?
1.
1, exactly, equal to 1, which means no equality whatsoever, which means that income is not distributed equally at all. Perfect inequality.
One person gets everything.
Exactly. Perfect inequality. Okay, so that's basically what the Gini coefficient is. It's simply A over A plus B. And if you want to get more equality in income distribution, you really need to shift this Lorenz curve up, and you need to keep on shifting it up and up and up until it becomes coincidental with the line of equality, or the 45-degree line, which simply means A will be 0, and obviously this whole area will be equal to B, basically. And this would mean that the Gini coefficient will be equal to 0. So Gini coefficient being equal to 0, that means perfect equality. Gini coefficient equal to 1, perfect inequality. So the Gini coefficient is scaled from 0 to 1, where 0 is perfect equality, 1 is perfect inequality. Okay, does everyone understand that so far? And, I just thought that I will look at some interesting points here. I'm not going to go and bore you with the rest, because all of that we already know. So, again, here, you can see that the more the Lorenz curve shifts upward, the better the country becomes in terms of distributing its income. So if it shifts from Lorenz curve 1 to Lorenz curve 2, obviously the country is becoming better off. It's seeing an improvement in its distribution of income. In other words, before, when the Lorenz curve is at the black Lorenz curve here, you can see that 20% of the population was only getting 5% of total income. Now with the new Lorenz curve, the red Lorenz curve here, as it pulges in towards the line of equality, you see that 20% now is getting 9% of income. So there is a 4% improvement in income distribution, basically. So that's basically what that is. And you can read all of that from the Lorenz curve and the Gini coefficient, and it's simply, gives us a very good idea of where the country is heading in as far as income distribution is concerned. And again, the closer the Lorenz curve is to the line of equality, the smaller area A will be, and as a result, the Gini coefficient will be very low. Now, if there's a high degree of inequality, then obviously area A will be much bigger, and this would simply mean that there will be a bigger percentage of the total area will be under A, which means higher inequality, basically. A rise in the Gini coefficient will show a rise in inequality, as we said, because it goes from 0 to 1. So the higher you are above 0, obviously the worse the income distribution becomes. And if you get to 1, then obviously there is imperfect or perfect imperfect income distribution. And that's basically, if we look at this, I think this is really interesting, by the way. And this is done for Great Britain between 2010 to 2012. So it's a 2-year period there where you can see all these curves, these Lorenz curves happen to represent different components of wealth, basically property, financial, physical, private pension. So, if we look at property, for example, or let's look at financial, which is the solid blue line, which is this line right here. Does everyone see this? The solid blue line? That's the financial status, basically. That really tells us how the British population will see the financial wealth being distributed among the different groups, of course. And as you can see, and this is very interesting, by the way, you can see that this solid blue line enters into negative territory. What does that mean? That simply means that there are a lot of people in debt here. Financial.
Would that be like loans too?
What's that?
Would that be accounting for loans as well?
Yeah, if you are in debt, absolutely. Yeah, so you're pretty much don't own much. You're pretty much in negative territory, in as far as financial assets or equities are concerned. And this is basically what you see right there. And then, of course, if we look at property, which is this one right here, you also see that there isn't really that much equality in owning real estate, etc. So very, very few people happen to be owning real estates in Britain, which is another indicator, if you will, to show you how income has been ill-distributed. So you can see there it says that the Lorenz curve shows the cumulative wealth of each wealth decile. It shows that the lowest 38% of individuals have zero property wealth. Again, property is the broken blue line. So it says 38%. So, we're talking about somewhere here, all the way up to here. 38% of individuals have zero property wealth. Zero. That's, around there somewhere. And the top 10% own nearly 50% of property wealth. So if I'm going to look at here, let's say, because I'm looking at the 10%, so I'm going to be looking from 90 to 100. So if I go all the way up until I reach that point right there, I see that 10% own 50% of the property. That's a huge difference right there. If only 10% own 50%, that means 90% of the population own only 40% of property. 90% own 40%. Oh, I'm sorry, 50%, I'm sorry. And the 10%, the top 10 own the other 50%. So 90% own 50% of property wealth, and the top 10% own 50% of property wealth. So again, this really gives you an idea of how income in Britain, and by the way, in a lot of the industrialized countries, it's not very well distributed. So you can see from here, this is another interesting graph here for Britain. And this is inequality as measured by Gini coefficient 1979 to 2010, 2011. It's a long period of time here, and it shows, 1979 was pretty good. It's not that bad. The Gini coefficient very low, below 25. But then look at the trend in the 80s. Look what happened in the 80s. Income has become a lot more ill-distributed during the 80s. So you can see the trend, upward trend, all the way up to 34.34. And then, of course, it leveled off. It went down, up, leveled, and then it's starting to go down now, post 2010, 2011. I don't know what the trend is right now. Is it really continuing to go down, or has it flattened and now it's going up? I don't know. So you gotta pretty much find that out and see exactly what's happening to the trend. But from 1979 all the way to 2010, 2011, you can see that it has been not a very good picture for the income distribution in Britain. The trend has been high, it leveled, and it has really not gone down that much. So it's, the max it has reached is about 0.36. And then it fell down to 0.34 in 2011, but that's about it. But it all started from a very low number of about 0.25, and it went all the way up to 0.34, which tells me that Britain has a lot to do in as far as income distribution is concerned. Now, if you look at the MENA region countries, of course, and if you try to look at the Gini coefficient for the MENA region, you will find that for the Arab sub-Saharan African countries, because remember, the MENA region is the Middle East and North Africa. So there are, I think, about two countries that are considered to be sub-Saharan. And that's basically Sudan and Yemen. So their Gini coefficient is about 35.9. Now, if we look at the resource-rich, labor-poor countries, let's categorize them in terms of resource-rich, labor-poor. I think that's better. Even though I don't have that, but I'm just going to pretty much give you a rough idea of what it is. For the resource-rich, labor-poor countries, the Gini coefficient on the average is probably around 28 or 0.28. As I said, it depends on how you want to look at it. So you can look at the Gini coefficient from 0 to 1, or you can look at it from 0 to 100. It doesn't matter. So let's look at it from 0 to 100. And the Gini coefficient for the resource-rich, labor-poor, it's about 28. For the resource-rich, labor-abundant, it's around 38. And for the resource-poor, labor-abundant, it's about 36. So you can see the difference in the Gini coefficients among the MENA regions. So the countries that are doing the best in terms of income distribution for the MENA region are the resource-rich, labor-poor, with a Gini coefficient of 28. Now, for other countries like Iran, for example, the Gini coefficient for Iran is about 38. For Turkey, it's about 42. And this is, by the way, in 2016. The numbers that I'm giving you are for 2016. So for Turkey, it's about 42. For Latin America, it's about 47. For Southern Europe, it's about 35. Turkey, 42. Iran, about 39, I would say. And again, the resource-rich, labor-poor, about 28. And the resource-rich, labor-abundant, 38. So there is a 10 percentage point difference. I'm sorry, 10-point difference right there between the resource-rich, labor-poor, resource-rich, labor-abundant. 38 and 28. So that's basically, hopefully this gives you an idea of what the Gini coefficient or the distribution of income looks like in the MENA region. Now, the next thing that we want to do, and hopefully, we pretty much said everything that we want to say about health and income. Now we come to the third component, which is education. Now, as far as education is concerned, in other words, by international comparisons, if you look at the level of education and the quality of education in the MENA region, and you try to compare what the MENA region has done with the rest of the world in terms of education, you will find that the MENA region has done an excellent job in one area of education, and that is in improving adult literacy. They did an excellent job there. And adult literacy has improved tremendously over the past 2 decades. However, I mean, the problem pretty much still exists in some countries, especially when it comes to female illiteracy. So not all countries in the MENA region have done very well with adult literacy, but on the whole, they did pretty good, with the exception of maybe 2-3 countries that did not do so well in as far as eliminating adult illiteracy is concerned, and also female illiteracy is concerned. And a lot of these things are basically the result of highly conservative social norms. Sometimes, they tend to also refer to the low literacy rate or the cause or the main cause of it, not only to highly conservative cultural norms, but also sometimes, certain authors tend to put religion there as well. And they would say, well, the religion, that is pretty much dominant in the MENA region is Islam, and Islam happens to pretty much be an obstacle to female literacy, which is absolutely wrong. I mean, that's not something that I subscribe to. In other words, religion basically has nothing to do with it. If you really go deep into the religion of Islam, in fact, Islam pretty much promotes education, knowledge, for all members of society. I mean, it does not make any difference between male and female. So, religion basically has nothing to do with it. Culture, yes. Conservative norms among societies, yes. But religion, no, I don't think religion really basically has anything to do with it, even though, some people in the region happen to misinterpret religion, by the way. I mean, as we will see in chapter 13 or 12, I believe, when we talk about Islam as a religion, you will see that a lot of people in that region have no idea of what Islam is. They call themselves Muslims, yes, but they have no idea of what Islam is or what Islam invokes. And we will have a lot to say about that in chapter 12 when we talk about Islam as a religion and its impact in the MENA region. But, those are some of the things that usually scholars and authors talk about when it comes to education in the MENA region. Basically, the one stumbling block for eradicating illiteracy or adult illiteracy basically is, especially amongst females, is the high conservative social norms that exist in that region. In Morocco, for example, and Yemen, female literacy is only around 45%. So you're talking about 55% illiterate. That's in Morocco and Yemen. Female literacy is only around 45%, very, very low number. And even in Tunis, for example, a country that is regarded to be highly progressive in the region when it comes to women's rights, etc. 30% of the female population in Tunis is illiterate. For a country like Tunis, that's very high. Illiteracy rate amongst females, 30%, very, very high. And illiteracy, of course, it's pretty much concentrated merely in rural areas and among the poorest in society, basically. That's where you find illiteracy, rural areas, and also amongst the poorest in society. Again, as I said, tribalism and religious values still dominate several social norms, if you will, in that region. And as I said, I really don't want to put too much emphasis on religion because I don't think that's the root cause. But, you know, we're going to leave that for now. But at least, you know, some authors tend to always bring that when they talk about illiteracy amongst females in the MENA region. Another thing, of course, that really contributed to at least a few countries in the region to this illiteracy epidemic, if you want to call it, is the a case in point will be Algeria. Remember when we talked about Algeria, we said that Algeria got its independence in 1962 from France. And immediately after the Algerians getting their independence, the first thing they did was to throw out all the French from Algeria for the simple reason because they felt that the French did not do good in Algeria when they were actually ruling over the people of Algeria. I mean, you know, Algeria was ruled for over 170 years by France. So that's a very, very long period. And the French always regarded Algeria as another French province. In other words, you know, I forget now the number of provinces that France has, but let's say if France has 15 provinces, they called Algeria the 16th province of France. So, you know, I mean, the French, they pretty much had a strong handle, if you will, on Algeria. And for that reason, the Algerians had a bad taste, if you will, in their mouth in as far as colonization or trying to associate themselves with French colonialism. So they really wanted to separate completely from France and start a new chapter. And the first thing they did, as I said, they pretty much expelled all the French from Algeria. And this had a heavy toll on the educational system in France for the simple reason because most of the teachers in France were French, basically. Now, when you expel all the French teachers, what do you think the result is going to be? Well, very dire consequences. And that's exactly what happened in Algeria for the first 4 or 5 years after independence. Instead of moving forward, they actually moved backward, simply because of the stupid idea of having to expel French teachers from Algeria, which doesn't make any sense, but you know, sometimes this is what you have when your decisions are irrational. Anyway, so the educational system in a lot of these countries was pretty much not in par with the rest of the world, but Having said that, the MENA region, or the governments in the MENA region, have actually made this taking care of education a priority. In other words, they spend so much money on the educational system. So if you look at how much money is being spent on the educational system in the MENA region as a percentage of total government expenditure, it's somewhere between 7% for the lowest countries to about 24%. So that's the range of total expenditure on education as a percentage of government expenditure, from 7% to about 24%, which is, that's a huge chunk of money to be spent on education itself. And of course, you have health and you have other things that you need to spend money on, infrastructure, but between 7 to 24% of the government budget was pretty much allocated towards education. This tells you how important education was in the MENA region. And actually, they made huge strides. I guess I'm gonna, unfortunately, stop right here because we really have to end the session. We're probably 5 minutes over time. Any questions? Anyone has any questions before we close this? Okay, so I guess I will see you on Thursday, and have a good one, everyone.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Professor. I'll see you on Thursday.
Thank you, Professor.